By the early 1970s, American automakers hit a pinnacle of around 7.2 to 7.5 liters of displacement for their largest displacement V8 engines. At this time, Cadillac was king of the hill with its 8.2-liter 500 cubic inch V8. By the late 1970s, the pinnacle had dropped to around 6.6 to 7.0 liters of displacement. Cadillac was king of the hill with a 7.0-liter 425 cubic inch V8. However, due to the rapidly rising new government-mandated corporate average fuel economy, or CAFE for short, standards, the party was over by 1980. For the 1980 model year, the pinnacle had dropped to around 5.7 to 6.0 liters of displacement. However, the most surprising aspect of 1980 was how quickly V8 engines were disappearing. 10 years beforehand, in 1970, most American-made passenger cars were equipped with V8 engines. By 1980, that was no longer the case, since new American-made cars with 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder engines were now more commonplace. Even some full-size and many mid-size rear-wheel drive American cars were equipped with larger displacement V6 engines. For instance, Buick's 3.8-liter and 4.1-liter V6 engines were available in many of GM's 1980 model year cars, including full-size cars from all of its U.S. car divisions: Buick, Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, and even Cadillac. Indeed, 1980 was a year of big changes, with a new low of V8 displacement being between 4.2 and 4.4 liters. For 1980, Chevrolet, Ford, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac all produced V8s with 4.3 liters of displacement for the low end of the V8 market. Ford, starting in 1980, offered the smallest displacement of the bunch, with its 4.2-liter V8, which was only 255 cubic inches. American automakers knew American car buyers still wanted smooth, torquey V8s under the hood. But the only way these automakers could meet CAFE's ever-increasing average fuel economy standards was by decreasing engine displacement. This plan did work, and it seemed to keep customers happy. However, it came at a cost. For the 1980 model year, the 4.2-liter to 4.4-liter V8s may have been smooth and reliable, but their engine output was generally no more than 120 horsepower. Fortunately, these very low displacement V8 engines would not become the new norm for the 1980s decade. They would disappear by the 1983 model year. V8-powered rear-wheel drive American passenger cars would settle on a new lower displacement standard of around 5.0 liters in 1983. And for most of these American passenger cars, 5.0 liters from 1983 until the end of the 1980s decade would also be the largest displacement V8s they would have. Most of the 5.0-liter V8s offered at the time were not new offerings. Ford's 5.0-liter 302 cubic inch V8 had been around since 1968. Chevrolet's 5.0-liter 305 cubic inch V8 dated back to its 1976 model year introduction. For the 1983 model year, the horsepower range of the different 5.0-liter V8s varied greatly. The low end of the horsepower scale was Ford's throttle body fuel-injected 5.0-liter V8, which made only 130 horsepower in some of its Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury cars. One such car was the 1983 Ford LTD Crown Victoria. While the top end of the scale for 1983 was Chevrolet's 5.0-liter HO V8, which was an engine option in the 1983 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 and Pontiac Trans Am. This engine was rated at 190 horsepower. Oldsmobile also offered a 5.0-liter 307 cubic inch V8 during all model years of the 1980s decade. The Oldsmobile 5.0-liter V8 produced as low as 140 horsepower, and in HO form, it produced as high as 180 horsepower. Both the Oldsmobile and Chevrolet 5.0-liter V8s were used in Buick, Cadillac, Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac's rear-wheel drive cars during the 1980s decade. Worth noting, Oldsmobil's 5.0-liter V8 was available in the 1980 to 1985 Oldsmobile Toronado and the 1980 to 1985 Buick Riviera. Both were front-wheel drive cars built on GM's E platform. Exceptions to the 5.0-liter norm were Cadillac, the Chrysler Corporation, and Pontiac. Cadillac introduced for the 1982 model year its small aluminum pushrod V8, the 4.1-liter V8. It was used in Cadillac's rear-wheel drive cars from the 1982 through 1985 model years, and in many of Cadillac's front-wheel drive cars from the 1985 through 1988 model years. The Chrysler Corporation, starting in 1981 and for the rest of the 1980s decade, only used a 5.2-liter V8 in its remaining Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth rear-wheel drive cars. Pontiac, for the 1980s decade, did offer its 4.9-liter 301 cubic inch V8 for the 1980 and 1981 model years, which was used in different rear-wheel drive Buick, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac cars. Additionally, Pontiac offered in its Trans Am and Firebird formula a turbo version of the 4.9-liter V8 for 1980 and 1981, which generated 210 horsepower for 1980 and 200 horsepower for 1981. Another 1980s decade exception of the 5.0-liter V8 norm was the Chevrolet Corvette, which had a standard 5.7-liter V8 during the entire 1980s decade. The only exception was the California market 1980 Corvette, which had a mandatory 5.0-liter V8 in order to meet the California Air Resource Board's emission standards for that year. Also starting with the 1987 model year, the high-performance versions of the Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Firebird and Trans Am were available with an optional 5.7-liter V8. There was also another V8 that had more than 5.0 liters. It was Oldsmobil's 5.7-liter diesel V8 engine, which during the 1980s decade, from the 1980 model year through the 1985 model year, could be found in GM's different divisions' rear-wheel drive and front-wheel drive cars. Another exception was Chevrolet and Ford's full-size police car offerings, which were available with V8s larger than 5.0 liters. For Chevrolet, it was a 5.7-liter V8. For Ford, it was a 5.8-liter V8. For the 1980 and 1981 model years, there were a few other exceptions of U.S. cars having V8 engines larger than 5.0 liters. As the 1980s decade progressed, U.S. automakers were able to standardize for most rear-wheel drive V8-equipped cars a baseline displacement of 5.0 liters because the CAFE standards plateaued for the 1985 model year at 27.5 miles per gallon, or MPG for short, for each automaker's fleet of cars. For 1986, it dropped back down to 26 mpg, which was the same standard figure used in 1983. It stayed at 26 mpg until 1989, when it went up slightly to 26.5 mpg. Due to the plateauing of the CAFE standards during the mid-1980s, U.S. automakers still could meet these standards with 5.0-liter V8s because of the use of fuel-efficient computer-controlled carburetors and sophisticated fuel injection systems. Not to mention these American automakers selling a lot of 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder powered fuel-efficient cars to offset the lower fuel economy ratings of the 5.0-liter V8 powered cars also helped. By the mid-1980s, most V8 powered cars had new 4-speed automatic transmissions and modern manual transmissions, both of which had overdrive gears for better fuel economy. Additionally, the average V8 powered car in the 1980s was considerably smaller, lighter, and more aerodynamic than the average V8 powered car in the 1970s, which helped to improve fuel economy. As an example of the progress, Hot Rod Magazine, April 1984 issue, test drove a 1984 Hurst Olds equipped with a 4-speed automatic transmission and Oldsmobil's 5.0-liter HO V8, rated at 180 horsepower. It did the quarter mile in 15.84 seconds, which was considered very fast by 1984 new car standards, and it had an EPA highway mileage rating of 24 mpg. As a comparison, a 200 horsepower 7.5-liter 455 cubic inch V8 and 4-speed manual equipped 1976 Trans Am was good for 15.6 seconds in the quarter mile, and on a good day, it was lucky to get 15 mpg on the highway. 5.0-liter V8s saw progress during the 1980s decade. In 1980, the highest output 5.0-liter V8 was the California market Chevrolet Corvette's LG4, which produced 180 horsepower. At the end of the 1980s decade, in 1989, the highest output 5.0-liter V8 was Ford's 5.0-liter HO V8, which was rated at 225 horsepower in the 1989 Mustang GT, 1989 Mustang LX, and 1989 Lincoln Mark VII. Output for a 5.0-liter V8 during the 1980s decade never dropped below 130 horsepower. The different 5.0-liter V8s generated anywhere from 230 to 300 pound-feet of torque, which would be considered very good even today. Today, 3 decades later, these 5.0-liter V8s have numerous inexpensive aftermarket performance parts available to easily transform them into serious performance engines. Even the pedestrian 140 horsepower Oldsmobile 5.0-liter V8 can use a wide array of older Oldsmobile small block V8 parts and current aftermarket performance parts, allowing big horsepower gains, where even a little over 300 horsepower is possible without a turbo or supercharger. All the V8s found in mass-produced U.S. cars during the 1980s were pushrod V8s with 2 valves per cylinder. By and large, most of these V8s were very reliable. Today, where cars produce much higher horsepower numbers, it's hard to understand the historical significance of the 1980s 5.0-liter V8s. After all, even the average turbo 2.0-liter 4-cylinder engines of today can easily outperform the best 5.0-liter V8s of the 1980s. However, the 1980s was an era when many cars had extremely slow 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder engines. In comparison, a car with a 5.0-liter V8 was a powerful car. Back in the 1980s, even if a 5.0-liter V8 was under the hood of a plain, low-option 4-door sedan or family station wagon, it didn't really matter, since if it had a 5.0-liter V8, the person driving it was somebody special. Thank you so much for your support of this channel. Please subscribe, since your support is the reason this channel is a success. And please make sure to click on the bell icon so that you never miss a new video release.